Episode 1. She put something in my drink. I woke up with nothing. Part 1. The dark. The first thing I remember is the ceiling. White. Cracked. A water stain in the shape of something I couldn't name. I stared at it for what felt like a very long time before I understood that I was supposed to be somewhere else. That I was supposed to be somewhere better than this. My mouth tasted like copper and chemicals. My head. It wasn't a headache. I need you to understand that. It wasn't a headache. It was more like someone had reached into my skull and wrung my brain out like a wet cloth. Every thought arrived delayed, bruised, wrong. I tried to sit up. The room spun. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before I noticed the silence. There's a specific kind of silence that lives in a hotel room that has been emptied. Not the peaceful silence of privacy. Not the comfortable silence of Sunday morning. This was the silence of absence. The silence of things that should be there and aren't. My phone wasn't on the nightstand. I looked on the floor, under the pillow, behind the lamp. Nothing. I walked to the small wooden dresser by the window. My laptop bag was gone. I walked to the bathroom. My toiletry kit was gone. My watch, a Seiko I'd worn every day for 11 years, was gone from the edge of the sink where I always left it. I walked to the room safe, mounted inside the closet. It was open. The door was just open, swinging slightly, like something had left in a hurry and hadn't bothered to close things behind it. My passport was gone. My emergency cash, $400 in mixed bills, was gone. My backup credit card was gone. I sat down on the floor of that closet. I'm not embarrassed to tell you that. I sat on the floor of a closet in a 5-star hotel in El Poblado, Medellín, Colombia, with no phone, no passport, no money, no laptop, and no memory of the last 4 hours of my life. And I sat there for a very long time. I want to tell you something before this story goes any further. I am not a stupid man. I have a master's degree in computer science from Northwestern University. I spent 22 years as a senior technology consultant. I've sat across the table from Fortune 500 CEOs and told them how to restructure their entire digital infrastructure. I have negotiated contracts worth more than some small nation's GDP. I was not a naive man, and none of that mattered. Not even a little. Part 2. What I left behind. Let me take you back to Chicago. January. 2 years before Medellin. I was 46 years old. And I was sitting in a Panera Bread at 7:15 in the morning, eating a bagel I didn't want, answering emails I didn't care about, wearing a coat I'd had for 8 years. My ex-wife, Karen, had been gone for 14 months. The divorce was mutual, rational, and utterly devastating in the way that quiet things often are. There was no screaming, no dramatic moment, just two people sitting across a kitchen table one evening, looking at each other, and finally, saying out loud what both of us had known for years. We had become strangers who shared a mortgage. My son, Tyler, was in his second year at Michigan State. He called me every Sunday. Good kid. But those calls, they had the rhythm of obligation. I could hear the effort in his voice. The effort to find things to say to a father who had worked his entire adult life and somehow managed to end up with nothing but a LinkedIn profile to show for it. I had money. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't running from poverty. I was running from something that money can't fix, which in some ways is worse. I was running from invisibility. I don't remember exactly when the idea of Colombia entered my mind. It crept in the way these things do. A YouTube video at 2 a.m., then a Reddit thread, then a documentary, then 3 more YouTube videos, then a whole evening lost to a rabbit hole of blog posts about men who had reinvented themselves in South America. They all said the same things. The women are beautiful. The weather is perfect. The cost of living is absurd. You can live like a king on a consultant's salary. You feel seen there. You feel alive there. I told myself I was just going for 6 weeks. A sabbatical. I told myself I was not the kind of man who runs away. I booked a 4-star apartment in El Poblado for the first 2 months. I told my few remaining friends I needed a change of scenery. I told my son I was taking some time to travel. I told myself I was not desperate. I landed in Medellin on a Thursday evening in March, and I stepped out of Jose Maria Cordova Airport into the warm night air, and I breathed in, and I felt, for the first time in longer than I can honestly remember, like something good was about to happen. The air smelled like flowers I didn't know the names of. A warm breeze moved through the terminal. Somewhere nearby, a woman was laughing. I stood on the sidewalk with my suitcase and I thought, this is it. This is the reset button. I want you to hold on to that feeling. That specific, fragile, beautiful feeling of a man who believes, for the first time in years, that things are going to be different. Because that feeling, that exact feeling, is the unlocked door. And they know exactly where it is. Part 3. The Woman in the White Dress. By my third week in Medellin, I had settled into a routine. Morning coffee at a cafe on Avenida El Poblado. Long afternoons working remotely from my apartment. Evenings walking the neighborhood, slowly, learning which streets had good energy and which ones made the hairs on my arms stand up. I had read the warnings. Of course I had. I knew about Scopolamine. I knew about dating app robberies. I had read every Reddit thread, every expat forum, every U.S. Embassy advisory. I thought, I am a careful man. These things happen to reckless men, drunk men, stupid men. I was careful. I wasn't drunk, and I didn't think I was stupid. It was a Friday, late, maybe 11 o'clock. A friend, another American expat I'd met at a co-working space, had invited me to a rooftop bar in the upper part of El Poblado. The kind of place where the cocktails cost 40,000 pesos, and the music is low enough that you can actually hear people talking. Not a tourist trap. A real place. The kind of place real Medellin professionals go. I remember standing at the railing, looking out over the valley, with a glass of aguardiente I'd barely touched, and feeling pleasantly, quietly content. And then she walked in. I'm going to try to describe her without being melodramatic. I know how this sounds. I know how every story like this one starts, and I know what you're thinking as you watch this. But I need you to understand that she was not what you're imagining. She wasn't overdressed. She wasn't wearing the kind of clothes that announce themselves. She was wearing a simple white dress, sleeveless, just above the knee, and small gold earrings. Her hair was down. She carried a small clutch bag. She looked the way some women look when they've been beautiful their entire lives and have long since stopped thinking about it. She was talking to the bartender in rapid-fire Spanish and laughing at something he said. She looked like she belonged somewhere. I was not going to talk to her. I want to make that clear. I had promised myself, in those 3 weeks in Medellin, that I wasn't going to chase anything. That I wasn't going to be one of those expat men, and there are many of them, believe me, who arrive in South America with their divorce papers still fresh and their self-esteem still bruised, grasping at beauty like it's something that can be purchased. I was not going to be that man. And then she turned around, looked directly at me, and said, in perfect English, with an accent that carried the musicality of her native Spanish underneath it, "You look like you're trying to solve a very complicated equation. Is the city bothering you, or are you just naturally worried?" And I laughed. Her name was Valentina. She was 34. She worked, she told me, in marketing for a pharmaceutical company based in Bogota. She was in Medellin visiting her sister for the weekend. She asked me what I did. I told her. She asked smart questions. Not the questions that are designed to flatter, not, "Oh, you must be so talented," but actually smart questions. She asked about the intersection of legacy infrastructure and cybersecurity. She asked whether I thought Colombian fintech startups were adequately addressing rural banking access. She talked about an article she'd read in MIT Technology Review. I am telling you this because I need you to understand why I was not suspicious. She wasn't running a script on me. She wasn't performing interest. She was interested. Or she performed it so perfectly that after 22 years of reading people in boardrooms, I could not tell the difference. We talked for 2 hours. At some point she touched my arm when she laughed. At some point she leaned in to hear me over the ambient noise of the bar. And I could smell her perfume, and I thought, This is what being alive feels like. I had forgotten this completely. At some point, my friend, the one who had brought me there, appeared at my shoulder, raised his eyebrows at me with a grin, and quietly disappeared. At some point, Valentina looked at her phone, wrinkled her nose slightly, and said her sister had gone to sleep early. She looked up at me. I don't suppose you know anywhere quiet we could continue this conversation. And I, a man who had read every warning, who had told himself he was not reckless, who prided himself on being careful, I said yes. Part 4, the moment I should have seen. We took a taxi to my apartment. It was 3 blocks away. 3 blocks. We sat on the balcony. The night was warm. Somewhere in the valley below, a cumbia was playing from a party that never seemed to stop. The city spread out below us like a map of someone else's happiness. She asked if she could make us a drink. I said yes. Here is the moment. Here is the thing I've replayed probably 10,000 times since that night. I was sitting on the balcony, looking at the city. I heard her moving in the kitchen. And at one point, for no particular reason, I turned and looked through the glass. She was standing at the counter, profile to me, and her face had changed. Not dramatically, not cartoonishly. It wasn't a villain's sneer. It was subtler than that, and therefore more disturbing to remember. Her expression for just a moment had become completely neutral, completely blank. The way a person's face looks when they think no one is watching, and they stop performing. Just for a second. Then she looked up, saw me watching, and the warmth flooded back into her face like a light being switched on. She smiled and raised a glass toward me through the window. I smiled back, and I told myself I had imagined it. I want to tell you what scopolamine feels like, not to sensationalize it, but because I think it's important that you understand this is not like being drunk. It's not a pleasant buzz. It's not a gradual drowsiness. It's a specific kind of wrong. It began, maybe 15 minutes after I finished the drink, as a heaviness in my arms, as if gravity had made a private decision about my body that it hadn't shared with the rest of the universe. Then my thoughts started arriving. This is the only way I can describe it. A half-second late, like a translation delay. I'd think a sentence and then hear it in my own head after a pause. I remember looking at Valentina. I remember thinking, something is wrong with me. I remember opening my mouth to say it. I do not remember anything after that. Part 5, the morning after the world ended. The police came to the hotel lobby because the front desk called them after I walked downstairs, barefoot, in the same clothes I'd worn the night before, with no phone and no ID, and told them what had happened. There were 2 officers. They were not unkind. I want to be fair about this. They were not unkind, but they were also profoundly, wearily unsurprised. They had heard this story before. They had heard this story many times before. One of them, a younger officer, early 30s, neat uniform, wrote everything down in a small notebook. He asked for a description of the woman. I gave it. He wrote it down. I watched him write it, and I had the specific terrible feeling of watching someone go through a procedure that everyone in the room knows will not produce a result. The older officer at one point said something in Spanish that the younger one translated for me. He says these cases are very difficult to pursue. The women are usually part of organized groups. They change phones. They change neighborhoods. He says you are not the first this week. Not the first this week. I sat with that for a long time. My passport was gone. Do you understand what that means practically when you are alone in a foreign country? You do not exist. You have no identity. You cannot get on a plane. You cannot rent a car. You cannot access most banking services. You are, in the bureaucratic sense of the word, a ghost. The U.S. Embassy took 2 days to process an emergency passport. 2 days during which I stayed in that hotel room. The hotel, to their enormous credit, agreed to continue my stay on a temporary basis. Eating room service charged to a card I'd left in my luggage because I never carried it to bars, and making phone calls to my bank, my insurance company, my credit card company, and my son. The call to Tyler was the worst thing. He was calm. Too calm. The way young people are calm when they are terrified and trying to hold it together for a parent. He arranged to wire me money through Western Union. He did it quickly and efficiently and without reproach. And when I thanked him, he said, "Dad, just come home." And something in me, something that I hadn't even known was still standing, collapsed. The full accounting, when I finally had access to everything, was approximately $23,000. The phone banking access had allowed her, or whoever she was working with, because I now believe she didn't work alone, to transfer money from my accessible checking account before the bank's security system caught the unusual activity and froze the transfers. The laptop alone was worth $2,400. The watch, which I am still quietly mourning, had been my father's before it was mine. The passport, the dignity, the particular shattering that comes from understanding that your emotional needs were mapped, exploited, and monetized in under 4 hours. That part doesn't have a dollar value. Part 6, what I know now. I have been home for 14 months. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Milwaukee, which is where I grew up and where I never thought I'd return. I'm consulting again, remotely, smaller contracts, enough to pay the bills and slowly rebuild what was taken. Tyler came to visit at Christmas. We talked more honestly than we had in years, which is perhaps the single strange gift in all of this. I think about Medellin more than I admit to people. Not with hatred. That surprises people when I tell them. I don't hate the city. I don't even hate her, Valentina, or whatever her name actually was. What I feel when I think about her is something closer to a kind of awful respect. She was extraordinary at what she did. She read me in minutes. She found the exact frequency of attention that would disarm a man like me, and she played it perfectly. She exploited nothing in me that wasn't already there. That's the part that takes the longest to sit with. I've read, since coming home, that this pattern, the beautiful woman, the upscale venue, the invitation back, the drugged drink, the complete erasure, follows a script so consistent across Medellin, Bogota, and Cartagena that Colombian investigators have a specific task force for it. That in the final months of 2023 alone, 8 American men died under similar circumstances in Medellin. 8. The U.S. Embassy issued a formal warning. The warning didn't go far enough. Because the warning talks about being careful on dating apps. It talks about not going to isolated locations. It talks about meeting strangers in public places. It doesn't talk about what actually makes men like me vulnerable. It doesn't talk about the 48-year-old divorced man who has been invisible for so long that when a beautiful, intelligent woman treats him like he's the most interesting person in the room, every rational alarm in his brain goes offline. It doesn't talk about loneliness. Because loneliness is the drug that was already in my system before I ever touched that drink. I want to say something directly to you, if you are a man watching this who recognizes something in my story. Not because I want to frighten you away from the world. The world is enormous and beautiful, and Medellin is, genuinely, honestly, one of the most extraordinary cities I have ever seen. The food, the flowers, the mountains, the warmth of the people, the unbelievable energy of a place that rebuilt itself from something terrible. All of that is real. But there is a tax. There is a hidden tax on paradise, and it is assessed specifically against men who arrive carrying the specific currency of desperation. Loneliness. Romantic hunger. The need to feel chosen. They can smell it on you. And they are very, very good at collecting it. So, if you are packing that suitcase right now, if you are scrolling through those photos of neon-lit streets and thinking, this is my reset button, this is where I go to feel alive again, I am not here to tell you not to go. I am here to tell you to go as who you actually are. Not as who you were before the divorce, not as who you were before the burnout, not as the man you imagine yourself becoming in a warmer city with cheaper rum and women who seem to see you. Go as yourself, the whole self, the lonely, complicated, grieving, hopeful self. Because that man is harder to rob. I still have the water stain. I've thought about it 100 times. The one on the ceiling of that hotel room. I never figured out what it looked like. Maybe that's the point.